Good evening, I'm Diana Skaya, and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. A deadly Russian drone strike on a civilian minibus in Ukraine's Sumy region kills 9 and injures 7, just hours after the first face-to-face Ukraine-Russia peace talks in Istanbul in over 3 years failed to advance. Aside from a prisoner swap, the fresh bloodshed dims hopes for peace. We'll have more of that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. George Simion accuses Muldova of interfering in Romania's presidential vote. 300 kilometers for change. Hungary's opposition leader rallies the nation. And Berlin draws a red line on Beijing-Moscow ties. On Sunday, May 18, Romanians head to the polls for a decisive presidential runoff, a face-off between hard-right leader George Simion and centrist Nicușor Dan. Now, it's a rerun of the elections which were cancelled last December. Our Balkans correspondent, Pavel Chaskovsky, is on site in Bucharest with the latest. Good evening, Pavel. So from what I gather, some votes have already been cast, and it's a big day for Romanians tomorrow, but there are also reports coming out that presidential candidate George Simion has accused the anti-Russian government in Muldova of trying to manipulate the vote against him on the first day of voting abroad. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Diana, indeed, Romanian diaspora is already allowed to vote. Diaspora that in the first round of presidential elections held 2 weeks ago voted predominantly for George Simion, apart from the Romanians in Moldova, whose votes were mostly to Nicușor Dan. And since the voters' turnout in Moldova is significantly higher this time round, this prompted George Simion to accuse the government in Chișinău of voting fraud. However, Simeon gave no evidence to back up his claim, but it is important to remember that the relations between Simeon and the government in Chișinău are rather tense. In fact, Simeon is banned from entering Moldova until 2028 because of a campaign that he led that sought to unify Moldova and Romania. And this attack by Simeon also shows that each vote counts in the runoff of the presidential elections, because although Simeon won the first round in the landslide, securing twice as many votes as his opponent Nicușor Dan, this week polls were released showing that both candidates are neck and neck, and therefore tensions are high here in Bucharest ahead of the runoff, a runoff that is expected to finally bring some political stability to the country, political stability that was lost 6 months ago with the annulment of the first round of presidential election. But this story, I believe, deserves a separate piece, and this is why I encourage you to listen to this report. Friday, December 6th, 2024. Romanians are preparing for a presidential runoff to be held during the weekend, in which extreme right candidate Călin Georgescu is to face liberal candidate Elena Lasconi. But then the news breaks. The country's constitutional court annuls the first round of presidential elections.
Because the democracy was cancelled with a court.
The main reason justifying the annulment was foreign malign interference that favored Georgescu, then a little-known independent candidate and a surprising winner of the first round. This plunged the country deep into political turmoil.
It's quite uncertain, unfortunately. It's uncertain, and we don't know which direction it's going, which scares us and our families.
Undemocratic, and it is very bad that this happened.
Since the new president was not elected, Klaus Iohannis, who had been holding the office for 10 years, vowed to remain the country's head of state.
When the new president will be sworn in, I will leave the office.
Only to resign 2 months later, fearing he might be ousted by the new parliament. Eventually, an interim president was elected, a date for an election rerun was set, and Georgescu was banned from running in it.
Because this is like a never-ending telenovela in continuous mode since November, December, and we have to close this by mid-May and resume, I wouldn't necessarily say normalcy, because our country has changed quite a lot.
But the way this crisis had been handled was criticized not only domestically, but also internationally.
I do believe it was a totally wrong decision. And the story was that you have a grand coalition government and their candidate didn't manage to go to the second round. Obviously, something was going wrong.
And also, the Romanian governing coalition came under fire from its closest and most powerful ally, the US.
Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency.
As a consequence, the rerun is being held under the scrutiny of the US.
We're doing that because this country is important to us.
And as the rerun first round left Romanians with a choice between hard-right, pro-Trump candidate Simeon.
We share common values with the Trump administration and the MAGA, Make America Great Again movement in the United States.
And centrist pro-EU candidate Dan.
Romania has three pillars of security. One is NATO membership, the second is the strategic partnership with the United States, and the third is the EU membership.
This choice is eventually not that much different from the one produced by the cancelled election half a year ago. A clear vote of no confidence for the ruling establishment of Romania. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Now let's move on to Hungary. Well, Hungarian opposition leader Péter Magyar is turning heads and rallying the nation. As he wraps up the second day of his epic 300-kilometer march, crowds are calling for change amid deep divisions fueled by Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's controversial policies. Hungary's former foreign minister Péter Magyar spoke to TVP World and told us that Magyar's momentum is nothing short of, quote, fantastic progress. Alexandra Sharek has the story.
The 1 million Steps for Peace and National Unity Walk, initiated by Péter Magyar, has completed its second day, with Hungarian citizens joining him in the symbolic march to promote national reconciliation.
People are talking and having a good time. They're at peace, rejecting hate, discrimination, and violence. I know, I'm becoming more and more certain every day that this is the new Hungary, a humane Hungary.
Péter Magyar is the leader of the center-right TISA party, which, according to Political's poll of polls, now surpasses Orbán's national conservative Fidesz party by 5%. Magyar comes from a distinguished political family that includes a former president of Hungary. The opposition leader used to be part of Orbán's party, but left before the European Parliament elections in June last year.
Péter Magyar appeared on the political scene in Hungary a short time ago, just slightly more than 1 year, I would say, before the last European parliamentary elections. And he made a fantastic progress because he is attracting more and more people. And according to the last opinion polls, he is already ahead of the Fidesz party of Viktor Orbán.
Former Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs Péter Magyar views the walk as a demonstration against Viktor Orbán's support for George Simion, the far-right candidate in the Romanian presidential elections who has acted against the interests of the Hungarian community in Romania.
Now everyone can see that the biggest threat to this country is actually the Prime Minister and his 3,000 accomplices. I can see the whole country coming together against them. And that's what I see when we walk around here and people honk at us from their cars. People are calling out to us and shouting with us. So even now, on the second day, there's tremendous unity.
One of the key accusations Magyar has made against the Prime Minister is that he is blocking aid for Ukraine while maintaining close ties with Russia and supporting the aggressor. He also accuses Orbán of using Hungary's secret services to discredit major opponents and divide Hungarians politically. Participants of Magyar's walk want change.
I think that's what's really happening here, step by step. Let's just say it's something that's been going on for 14 months now, and it gives people hope. I think millions of people now believe that this hope is worth having. And really, I think we've felt the hope every step of the way.
Magyar's walk will end in Oradea, Romania, a city that has strong cultural links with Hungary. The opposition leader has called on everyone to join him for the final steps of the million he had planned.
No breakthrough, no Putin, and a growing frustration in the West. The first direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in over 3 years ultimately concluded in failure, apart from a record prisoner swap. Hours later, a Russian drone strike on a civilian bus killed 9 people in the Sumy region, a harsh reminder of the war's reality. As EU leaders gear up for a new set of sanctions, pressure is mounting on Washington to act. Our Kazimierz Łysiak gives us the details in this next report.
That's a civilian bus in Ukraine, or rather, what's left of it. At least 9 people died after a Russian drone struck the vehicle in the Sumy region on Saturday morning. Another clear sign of Russia's intentions in Ukraine, less than 48 hours after the disappointing negotiations in Turkey. In Kyiv, there is reluctant joy at the news of 1,000 prisoners being swapped in the largest POW exchange since the start of the war.
The return of prisoners is absolutely a good initiative. I agree that such things are absolutely a reason for celebration.
But that's where the positives about the Thursday talks in Istanbul end. Even though these were the first direct talks between the two sides since the start of the war, Ukraine and its Western allies are not too pleased with the fact that Russian President Vladimir Putin was a no-show.
Once again, Russia is obfuscating. Once again, Russia is not serious. At what point do we say to Putin, enough is enough?
All eyes are now on US President Donald Trump, whose forgiving attitude to Putin is contrasted daily by Russian atrocities committed in Ukraine. Is this the moment the United States will finally exert pressure on Moscow?
Faced with President Putin's cynicism, I'm convinced that President Trump, who is concerned about the credibility of the United States, will react.
So far, the US leader has reacted with a comment straight from his standard playbook. First, play up his own importance, and then say anything could happen.
We have to meet. He and I will meet. I think we'll solve it, or maybe not, but at least we'll know. And if we don't solve it, it'll be very interesting.
The US president referred here to a possible meeting between him and Vladimir Putin, something the Kremlin has also hinted at. For now, Trump has announced he will speak on a call with both Putin and Zelensky on Monday. But that's not exactly what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky would like to see from his US counterpart after the diplomatic fiasco in Turkey.
There needs to be a strong reaction, including sanctions against Russia's energy sector and banks.
While the EU has announced it is already working on a new sanctions package targeting, among others, Russia's financial sector and Moscow banks, the US hasn't yet followed suit. A former Ukrainian ambassador to the United States and France told TVP World that these measures could prove crucial in getting Putin to the negotiating table.
The Russian economy finally started to vacillate. The prices for oil dropped substantially, and it means that if severe economic sanctions are imposed, that would really hurt the war machine of Putin.
In another interview after the Turkey talks, President Trump has once again said he will impose additional sanctions on Russia if no peace agreement is reached in the coming days, a claim he's already made more than once. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Polish, Romanian, Czech, Lithuanian, and U.S. troops participated in a simulated offensive and defensive combat mission at the Bemowo-Piskie training ground. These drills, organized by the Polish Army's 16th Mechanized Division, are part of NATO's multinational Griffin Lightning 25 exercises, a multi-domain operation aimed to test out the Allies' operational readiness, coordination, and combat preparedness. Zuzana Jurek was on site and has the story.
Simulated offensive and defensive maneuvers. This was the task of the Allied Armed Forces training in the northeast of Poland today. The armed forces partook in a series of drills in a simulated urban area which was captured by enemy forces. Their tasks included the infiltration of enemy lines, recapturing the opposing forces as well as the occupied areas.
armored transporters, also the K2 tanks, which was on the ground over there attacking enemies, but also the Air Force's F-16, and they were attacking from the ground and from the air. They were attacking 2 buildings over there.
The training ground in the northeast of Poland is situated just over 100 kilometers away from the Suwałki Gap, which has been identified as a strategic choke point for the NATO alliance. The territory, which is on the border of Poland and Lithuania, is the shortest crossing between Belarus and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. The tensions around the area have intensified since the Baltic states, as well as Poland, joined the NATO alliance.
Mainly this, small piece of ground is a connection between Central Europe and Baltic states, especially now when the number of critical infrastructure in this terrain is increasing. The good example, is the power line between Poland and Lithuania, and probably, as everybody knows, the Lithuanians cut off the electricity from Russia, and now everything is delivered through this narrow piece of terrain.
The exercises carried out here in Poland today are part of the broader Griffin Lightning 25 exercises. These exercises aim to ensure that the NATO alliance has the operational readiness, capability, as well as is able to deploy at speed should an enemy provocation occur, most notably from Russia or Belarus. These exercises aim to draw from experiences from the previous theatres of war and ensure that the alliance has the equipment as well as domain and strategy necessary and ready for the modern theatres of war. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
And with war still raging in Ukraine and global alliances shifting, Germany's new chancellor is drawing a red line. In his debut address to the Bundestag, Friedrich Merz warned of escalating geopolitical risks posed by China's growing ties with Moscow and called for a stronger and more unified European response. Sonia Gata-Biszczan breaks it down in this next report.
Friedrich Merz did not hold back in his first speech as Chancellor to the German Bundestag when discussing China. He noted visible elements of, quote, systemic rivalry in the country's foreign policy.
Frankly speaking, we view the growing closeness between Beijing and Moscow with considerable concern. We're committed to ensuring that China plays its part in resolving the war in Ukraine.
The call for China's involvement in the matter is not new. Other European leaders have made similar appeals.
We count on China to use all its influence on Russia to end Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine.
The only country that could end the war and call Putin to order is China. If China were to threaten a trade embargo, Russia would be forced to cave in. However, it doesn't look like that at the moment.
Experts share similar doubts regarding China's eagerness to advocate for peace in Ukraine.
To encourage China to occupy even a neutral position in this war is really another illusion, because China was, is, and will remain an ally of Russia as far as this suits the Chinese interests.
Earlier in May, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Russia for the Moscow's Victory Day parade. The event also featured China's People's Liberation Army.
The Chinese president was clearly the guest of honor at the Victory Day parade. He was clearly the top man on Red Square, and they've again signed a number of agreements which have further deepened ties.
In my view, this is the most serious threat multiplier. Namely these coordinations. It's not a strategic alliance, it's a modus operandi of strategic coordination in all systemically relevant domains. Meanwhile, we have still missing information about key domains such as defense cooperation.
In 2024, China was the EU's biggest trading partner for imports and Germany's second largest trading partner altogether. Both the EU and Germany refer to China as, quote, simultaneously a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival.
The significance of the relations between China and Russia is now giving a food for thought for us. And we have to really think and look closely how to reshape our relations with China in the European Union.
In the same speech, Merz added that China would remain an important partner for Germany and the EU in addressing global challenges, but he also made it clear that he would still demand that the agreed rules of industrial and trade policy be respected. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
Physical scars do not define them. The traumas they endured won't stop them from reclaiming comfort in their own bodies, even though they will forever carry marks of the war. Now, a group of Ukrainian women have taken a challenging and quite a bold step toward healing by posing for a daring photo shoot for a renowned magazine. Anastasia Yanchenko had an opportunity to speak to them and bring their stories closer in her report.
The scars on my body are traces of my thorny path. This is the motto of the newest Ukrainian edition of Playboy magazine. These are stories of strong women whose bodies will forever bear the marks of the war in Ukraine. The aim of this Playboy issue is to highlight female strength and beauty that does not fade after trauma and to help women embrace their bodies after life-altering injuries. On the cover is Anastasia Savka from Lviv, a brave sniper who fought on the front lines. Anastasia's life changed forever when she stepped on a mine while serving at the Zaporizhia front line, resulting in the loss of her leg.
First of all, after my injury, I didn't stop being a woman. I didn't stop loving myself. I didn't stop wanting to be feminine, desirable. I just have an injury, but it doesn't stop me from living and being the way I want to be.
Another is Yana, who served as a war correspondent, a combat medic, and later retrained as a drone operator. In 2024, she was seriously wounded in a Russian drone attack. A shrapnel scarred her face and body.
I went through terrible things, terrible burns. The rehabilitation lasted almost a year, and I had 4th-degree burns. I didn't know how to go on living with my new face, but then I just accepted it as my unique trait.
Also featured is Olga, a businesswoman from Vinnytsia and a mother of 2. In 2022, she survived a missile strike on Vinnytsia, which killed at least 24 people. But Olga managed to escape from a burning building, suffering severe burns, broken ribs, and contusions.
I will never forget that day. The entire building burned down, and people burned alive inside of it. I miraculously survived, although with scars all over my body. But at least I didn't die.
Despite all the horrors they endured, these women have found the strength to continue with their lives, not giving into despair or isolating themselves from the world. As they bravely share how they learned to love their new beauty, it serves as inspiration to many other women, giving them hope for a brighter future.
I joined this project to help educate society, to tell my story, and on my own example show women who are now in the same situation I was in that life goes on, life prevails, and that we are beautiful, even with our injuries and wounds.
These women, whose beauty and courage shine through the pain, show that behind the scars lies an indestructible spirit that war can never extinguish. This report for TVP World by Anastasia Yanchenko.
Just hours after the first direct Ukraine-Russia talks in over 3 years ended without a ceasefire, a deadly Russian drone strike hit a civilian minibus in Ukraine's Sumy region, killing 9 and wounded 7. Now, despite the tragedy, both countries agreed on a large prisoner swap, a rare positive note in an otherwise tense standoff. And now all eyes are on the West to see what further pressure could be imposed on Russia. Joining me now to discuss this further is Elizabeth Braun, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Our guest specializes in defense against gray zone and hybrid threats, exploring the intersection of geopolitics and the globalized economy. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, let me jump straight in and ask you this. How should we interpret Putin's message on that deadly Russian drone strike in Sumy just hours after the Istanbul talks?
Well, Putin clearly thinks he can get away with not being particularly supportive of the peace process. First, he didn't turn up to the talks, as you said, and then we saw this strike. And he is continuing to behave in a provocative manner because he has clearly decided he can get away with it. And the question is how far he'll push, and I think that is what he himself is trying to figure out. Where is the point where President Trump decides that Russia has or Putin has taken it too far? That point has clearly not come yet. So Putin keeps pushing.
Let me ask you this. I mean, if I just go back to the talks for a moment, Margarita Simonian, we know the founder of RT, propagandist of the Kremlin, she said that next time it wouldn't be, Moscow's demands wouldn't be 4 regions, that it would actually be towards 8 regions. What do you make of Russia's threatening demands?
Well, the first thing to remember is that she is a career propagandist, so she is in the business of making outlandish claims and outlandish demands. But this again shows how confident she and others in the Kremlin circle are being in an obstructive and offensive way, literally and in words, and offensive in deeds, on the battlefield. And what for us Europeans, what that means is that what it suggests is that European peace efforts, including recent ones involving Friedrich Merz of Germany, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, and Donald Tusk, that they haven't really landed very forcefully yet, and that's a reason to try even harder. But it is, frankly, a really uncomfortable situation for European countries and the EU or the European and the European pillar of NATO to be in, to see that all our efforts account for very little, make very difference. The will is that to support Ukraine, but it's not making a big difference for Ukraine because it's not managing to impress Russia, and that is an uncomfortable situation to be in. But we should remember that Donald Trump wants a peace deal. He's hopefully able to see through President Putin's tricks sometime soon, and see that President is not interested in peace.
Elizabeth, let me interrupt you there. I mean, you did mention Trump and that he wants to see that peace. Now, he is set reportedly to speak to both Putin and Zelensky on Monday. How do you think that will unfold? What can we expect from that? I mean, he did say he would slap more sanctions on Russia if Putin didn't agree to a ceasefire. What can we expect?
I heard somebody describe the US, Russia, Ukraine triangle the other day as an uncomfortable marriage involving 3 people. There should only be 2 people in direct negotiating, Russia and Ukraine. But clearly, Putin has decided that he will only negotiate with Trump. And unfortunately, Donald Trump has undermined President Zelensky by seeming to suggest the same thing. So what we'll see is some sort of iteration of what has already happened before, that Trump and Putin set the tone, and Zelensky, who really should be a protagonist because it's his country that's been invaded, is almost sort of a secondary participant in terms of weight, and that is extremely unfortunate. But neither Zelensky nor we as Europeans nor European leaders are in a position to change that.
Elizabeth, what about the prisoner swap? Do you think that it could pave way for more meaningful negotiations, or do you think that it's just a symbolic gesture?
Well, it's a symbolic gesture. It's better than nothing, which is what we had expected. So the week ended with on a bit more of an upbeat note than had been the case before. But what Putin did was provocatively sending a second-rate or even third-rate delegation to the negotiations when President Zelensky himself had declared himself willing and indeed willing to turn up, and indeed then did turn up in Turkey. So what we'll see is a continued. what we'll see is, I think, a continued conversation at that level, but the conversations at that level are not going to lead to a breakthrough. So maybe a few more gradual steps, but real breakthroughs, as President Zelensky rightly said, have to come conversations between him and President Putin.
And we can also imagine the families that have been waiting, some of them for years, for this, particularly Ukrainian families, to get back their loved ones back home. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Braun, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, for being with us here on TVP World this evening.
Thank you.
And that completes this edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching, and stay with us for more news, features, and commentary here on TVP World.